Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on improving your in-person and online presentation skills. My name is Jodi Hammer, and I will be your host today. And I'm very happy to be here with you, and I look forward to just chatting about this topic and answering your questions and also making it as interactive as possible. I really do like to have this be more of a conversation, and I will ask for your insight and have you drop comments into the chat box. And I think today we have a small enough crew, you could also just unmute yourself if you wanted to answer the questions that I'm going through here. So let's go ahead and take off. First of all, let's look at briefly defining, right? What are presentation skills? How would you define presentation skills if you were to do so? You can take a moment to drop that into the chat box is fine. Or you can just unmute yourself.
Sure, presentation skills are connecting with others.
Yeah. Great. That's definitely involved in it. Presentation skills are a good part of that, is connecting successfully with other people. That's the point of your presentation, whatever you're presenting for, whether it's something in your work or something as part of a job interview. And we can talk about all those different aspects and what types you're more interested in as well. So absolutely. Thank you, Chester. I appreciate you sharing that. So I do have just a definition here that I like how it was defined. It's defined in many different ways, right? But I personally like this definition. So it's the abilities, and that's plural because it's not just one ability, just like it's not just connecting with other people. There's a lot of other aspects, right? So defining it by saying the abilities one needs in order to deliver compelling, engaging information, transformative, educational, enlightening, and or instructive presentations. Because let's face it, there's a lot of different types of presentations, and there's a lot of skills that go into presenting. And we're going to be talking about also how you can get better at some of those skills, some of the tips and strategies and resources for you as well. So presentation skills are the other part of the definition here, is that they are central to effective presentation skills are things like public speaking, your tone of voice, your body language, creativity, and delivery. So we're going to be talking about some of the nonverbal things, right? And the verbal things, how you say it, how you present yourself, your actions, your tone, all of those things are going to be really important. And we're going to talk about those as we go through here. So let's go ahead and move on. Spending just a moment on, bad presentations. And what I'd love you to think of and put into the chat box is think of the worst or one of the worst presentations, you've ever heard or had to sit through, right? What was it that made it so bad? I have a couple of things on here, right? Maybe, it was very disorganized. Maybe there was a total lack of confidence or, just, little, if any, interaction or things like that. But what are some of the other things that you would say if you were defining, like a bad presentation and you're thinking about the worst one you've ever heard?
Over-reliance on PowerPoint.
What's that?
Over-reliance on the PowerPoint, assuming
Got
that.
it. Sorry, I can't hear you very well, but it might be on my end. Over-reliance on PowerPoint, absolutely. That can be a really big one, an annoyance. If it's just total PowerPoint, there's not that interaction, or there's not even that like stopping and gauging if they're really connecting with the audience, or if the audience has questions or anything, makes it very, that one-sided, right? Where, you're the audience and they're just blah, 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 and, hammering a point. And, no one wants to be in that kind of an environment. So great. So anything else? Let's see in the chat box if there's anything. No problem if not. All righty. So we are going to talk more about what makes a great presentation. And I have several things that are up here, but there's so much that is involved in a great presentation. And so I want to go through these concepts, but I want to spend a little bit of time on some of them, maybe explaining if you have questions or don't understand them, or maybe how can I get better at this? Happy to spend time on these as well. So some of the things that weigh into a great presentation that I have here, and then I'm going to ask you for some additional ideas, to either drop those into the chat box, some of the items in addition to these that you see on the screen. So organized and prepared, absolutely, right? And there's nothing like organization and preparation. Preparation including checking, for example, at the facility, maybe where they're going to be presenting, or a tech check, making sure that the room they're in, that it works, that things are good, on your end. So if you're at your job, for example, once we go back to our jobs and or once you get your, post-pandemic job, you can do those things if you think ahead, and actually do that run through and make sure that it's smooth. Maybe have some people sit in as a fake, to just make sure that your presentation is loading right and all of those fun things. And certainly acknowledging that we do have technology issues at times, and sometimes more often than we'd like to. And some of that might be involved in, during COVID times when we're all at home and trying to make, this, home be more of an office. And sometimes, we just don't have as great of technology, systems or whatnot. So understanding, of course, there are, things that weigh into it as well. But also, being well paced. So not rushing through it, right? Because what do we tend to do when we get nervous? What happens? Your adrenaline, right? Like, you get the adrenaline and all of that. And what do you tend to do when you're delivering in your delivery? How is it impacted? Do you tend to go slower or faster? Or, I guess it could be different for different people, but in general, when people get nervous or they're giving their presentation, they're going to, when they're nervous, go faster because that adrenaline is pumping, that, right? All of that. Now, some people like me are very fast talker. So for me, when I'm delivering my presentations, I'm always trying to make a conscious effort to slow down, because I'm a very fast talker, and you want to slow down because you want that pace to be such that they can absorb what you're saying and just not feel overwhelmed, right? Or part of it's getting lost, those kinds of things, right? So all of that is so important, obviously. Logical steps, if it's an instructional type of presentation, because let's face it, let's talk for a moment on the kinds of presentations that there are, right? What kinds of presentations, like one would be obviously delivering something at work, right? For your team or your boss or whatever, right? Maybe you're going to be presenting on a proposal to change a system or something like that. That's one example. But think about what are some other kinds of presentations or other areas in your life where you might be asked to do a presentation or need to do a presentation. If you can think about those, and maybe put in the chat box if you want to answer that, and I can share, or you can unmute yourself and share if you prefer. So a work presentation. I'll throw out another one. Oh, actually, Chester, did you have something?
Yes, I've been teaching online for the past year, so it is a kind of work presentation, but I was going to say a class lesson.
Like teaching?
Yeah.
You said teaching?
Teaching, yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. I for whatever reason, I just don't have very good volume. I'm not sure if let me just put mine up a little bit more even. Yeah, so in teaching, that's presentations on a whatever daily basis or however many times per week you meet, and it's all about presenting in a way that's not going to go over their heads, in a way that's going to keep them awake and or off their phones, right? Sometimes I feel there's probably nothing that keeps college students or whoever off their phones, but alas. So yeah, and exactly, just logically, doing it in a way where there's not a lot on the screen. We'll talk a little bit more about the tech tips, as well, the technology and like your PowerPoint and some suggestions for that to help you as well. But using compelling, language, and we're going to talk a little bit later about storytelling, incorporating stories and that compelling language can help people remain focused, right? If you do it in the right way, they can keep your whole goal in presenting is to connect as Chester said in the beginning, and to maintain that connection in order to transmit whatever information it is in a compelling way that's going to stick with them, or it's going to reach them, so that they're not going to drift or lose focus, that kind of thing. Great. Also, we talk about in the presentations, like showing, the why, and even starting with the why, right? So I work a lot with people on, their job skills and preparing for job interviews and doing their resume and things like that. And one of the big things that we, would incorporate into, when I worked at Peace Corps headquarters and ran the career center there, into all of our career conferences, when we would have the job fairs and the career conferences, we would, talk to people about that, starting with the why, when you're doing your kind of your elevator pitch, if you want to call it that, or your connection, not necessarily always starting, with I was born in this area, or I'm studied, whatever, and I'm now went to Peace Corps, and now I'm looking for this. That's the traditional maybe way of doing an elevator pitch to an employer, right? But starting with the why might be something like starting with something about the company. I've always been a staunch advocate for, or a fan, ever since I was 13 and got my first pair of Reeboks. And I mean, who knows if you're interviewing with, Reebok, the company, something more about the why, like starting with the story can be compelling, and then the why, and then get to the what. So like, why are you so drawn to this particular organization? What is it about their organizational culture or them that you start with, because that pulls them in and connects them, right? And that's why I'm so, and that's, my background. You can go into a little bit of your background. And that's why I went to Peace Corps, and am proud of the, whatever, I was able to achieve in Peace Corps. And I'm now looking to translate those skills into a career, and no better place in my mind than Reebok, given my blah, 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 whatever. So you can turn it around a little bit and make it more compelling. Okay. Using facts and statistics can be really good to a limited degree. There is such a thing as information overload, especially when it's statistics and, facts, because, they go in and it's, there's too many of them. They don't get really processed as much. It's just like people get confused. But if you kind of salt and pepper, those compelling stats, that can be really powerful to people in hearing you, whether it's you giving, a presentation for a job interview, or, you giving a presentation at your work, or for some other areas of your life. I mean, how many of you have been or may well be on a board of directors at some point for some nonprofit, whether it's the NPCA, right, the National Peace Corps Association, or another nonprofit that you might get involved with, and making presentations can be a part of that. So that can be really helpful as well. And then, just, prove you really, your facts and stats, as I said, are to prove, your position, like, especially if you're doing, for example, a compelling type of presentation where maybe it's a persuasive presentation where your goal is to change minds and or have them select your whatever it is option. And I did there's a different webinar that you can listen to on our NPCA Global Reentry playlist that's called Persuasive Communication Skills. And that's totally different. We're not going to get into that much here today just because of time, but you can certainly listen to that at your leisure. And what I might do is, if I remember, I will do my best to, in the follow-up email that I send here to folks, I will try to include maybe that link to that one, since it is very related to this, so that you could watch it at your leisure. Okay. Great. So I really like this graphic here, and I think it brings up a lot of the points that I wanted to say. And I hesitate to, I don't like long lists, right? When it's just a list and there's not a picture. This one has a lot of things that are shared, and it's actually by, this ed tech team. It's actually done for it's aimed at, and it's really relevant to many different areas, but it's aimed largely maybe at the educators, right? So, but it really is applicable. I'm going to go through some of these, right? So, what I was saying before about making sure you try to slow down, set your pace slower, like they say here, plan to go slower than you think, because you're always going to ramp it up a little bit, right? So, and some of the content that you might think is really easy to understand, or, just whew, easy, easy, for other people is it's new content, and it's hard for them to take that in sometimes. So, you definitely want to go slower than you think. So, and I like the little graphics here, right? The snail, the heart. I mean, it's just a little more personal, right? So you have to choose obviously the graphics for your audience, but when I'm working with RPCVs, I think we're very much, connected, and we're kind of family, if you will, in many ways, sharing that very important Peace Corps connection. So I think I can get away with it here. So the second tip shared here, sharing what you're passionate about. Obviously, when you have the opportunity to choose your topic, choose something that you are passionate about, because that comes through, and that's going to help you to connect, and it's going to help you to come out with your tone of, being more animated, more, just what's the word I'm looking for? Where you're into it, and it shows your passion and your enthusiasm, and that's huge. That's a huge part of connecting and getting people to listen to what you have to say. Making, and then this third one here, have the attendees gotten a chance to play or make sure they do, if at all possible, right, in presentations. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Well, yeah, that's not really going to be the case. When you're listening to a TED talk or something, you're not going to be like getting out something and doing it, right there. But I will say that more and more organizations are working in sometimes, even, into, their team building types of experiences, right? Or, different, conferences that they have. It's not just sitting and hearing one-way communication coming at you. They're really looking for ways to make it more dynamic and interactive. And the best conferences do this, right? Have you engage in different ways. And so there's variety. And some of that gets to that play. And part of that also gets to, tell me your experience when you've been to career fairs, right? If you've been to a job fair, which I gather you probably have, each of you at some point, how many of them don't have little playthings or little squeezy stress ball, shaped in their, whatever their logo is, or different kinds of games, things, they'll have a big, wheel that you spin and you can actually win something. It's all of those kinds of things are designed to draw you in, right? And to engage you. And so, much better than just saying, come listen to me, speak to you about XYZ. So think about those kinds of things too. And when you can make them, give them a chance to play, or break them into a small group and have them do a little, tiny group, micro group activity, that can be great. When appropriate, the next one talks about playing music or walking around and chatting with people. Like if they're in their breakout groups, you walking around and checking on how are things going. You're not like monitoring, you're more checking in to say, hey, anything unclear? Are you doing okay? I'm here. You're encouraging, you're getting that empathy, that kind of engagement with them, and trust. You're building trust too, which is important. So those are great. And a lot of times they'll have different kinds of things out in the hallway that will help you to interact, or between sessions at a lot of conferences and things. Exactly. The fifth one they share is, don't get too wrapped up in delivering content that you forget about the human beings. And this is really important. We're going to talk, I have a separate slide altogether on some of the nonverbal and some of the, things. But if you're just blah, 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 and just going on and on and on and on, and there's no interaction and there's no you drawing them in, whether it's through stories or, somehow getting them, or good, tech backup slides that can help, really reemphasize, that are, creative, that are great pictures and such, not just words jumbled together, that can really help them as human beings stay connected, stay awake, alert, and into your presentation. So this one also says, using a slide deck, right, as your that's your outline, but you're not going to be just reading the slides, right? That's your prompt. That's your kind of overall shell, so they know what you're talking about, but you're live talking about it. You want that to be more of you explaining the different steps, or, you don't have to have everything written down, right? It's you preparing in advance and then having those kinds of slides or graphics that might help you remember certain things to bring up. So that's important as well. And then be the seventh one here, be better than a hangout, make the session interactive, as I was saying even before, right? So what what kind of things can you do to make it interactive, right? So if you're in front of a group of people, right, and you're doing good, we'll talk about the nonverbals and all of that as well, and you engage them. Who can tell me one reason why we have da 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 da, and get them to say it, because then people are more. It's another person talking. It's a and it's a bit for you to just breathe. Let them say something and then acknowledge and go on and maybe pick somebody else, or maybe have some kind of other experience that that can definitely help, right? So and when possible, I mean, I know it's hard because a lot of times the presentation time that you have, you don't have a lot of time in the end for them to really synthesize what you've gone through. So depending on what the nature is of what you've done, maybe it's having them take what you've done and work in small groups and actually come up with something, right? Based on the strategies that you provided. That might be the case for you teaching, Chester. I don't know what kinds of things do you maybe incorporate to help them synthesize, what they've learned and in the session.
Well, after I introduce some concepts, I'll within the lesson say, here's the concept, here's some tips to keep in mind. Now practice.
Gotcha. And they practice through with each other in the class?
Yes, in Zoom, in breakout or in the larger room.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you're talking Zoomville, and I understand.
Yeah.
We all understand Zoomville.
Yes, when I was teaching in person, which was like 2 decades ago, yes,
right.
I would then say, you have your groups, or if I didn't break them into groups already, say, here, you're going to be in groups now.
Right.
Here's look at, I've written on the board, keep these reminders in your head, and now practice.
Yep.
And,
exactly.
And like I said, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to come around to see how you're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So you're giving them content, some directions, some insight, and then you're asking them to, okay, digest this and practice. Yeah, that's perfect.
Or if I do have to deliver a lecture, then towards the end I'll say, I know I've talked a lot, but do keep these things in mind.
Yep.
And perhaps give them some mnemonic devices to remember what I talked about over the past however many minutes.
Right. And that's the truth of the matter too, right? Sometimes when you are, especially when you were saying you were teaching law, correct? Is that right?
No, teaching English.
Teaching English, yeah. Sometimes when you're teaching, if you're in a class, if you're but if you are in a class where there's a lot of content that you have to cover, it can be hard to incorporate those little, those things in, and that can be difficult. But all right, great. So let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about, and this is one of those lists that, I said I generally don't like this, but there was a lot, and I wanted to keep it down to one slide so we could kind of go through some of it. Tips for giving great presentations, right? And this is as per, it's Indeed, part of their career. They have a really good career type of center, career resources at Indeed. So there's some good stuff there, but keeping it simple, right? Have you heard of the rule, the 10-20-30 rule, Chester?
No, I haven't, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it's 10, so it's 10 slides max, 20 minutes, for 20 minutes, and then a minimum of 30 font size. And I have another slide that's actually, this is a concept that I think Steve Jobs was the one who actually came up with this as his, this is his overall advice. So you'll see that in a minute.
The advice I've heard more about is from I'm forgetting his name right now, but the current Google CEO, who actually strictly does not use text in his slide decks.
None. He doesn't use any text.
No, I've challenged students of mine to avoid using text in their slideshows.
Right. No, it's great. It's great. It's sometimes
based on the research that people are people, and there's only so much that they can pay attention to at once. So either they're going to read or they're going to listen, attention in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good practice. That's awesome. So the second one we've talked about, really prepare and practice. Obviously, if you can do advanced preparation, that's going to help you to feel better about it, to be better at it, and all of that, and to see and your confidence will increase as well. Showing enthusiasm, that's a big one, right? I mean, whatever the topic is, if you can just even in the tone of your voice showing enthusiasm. Hey, today we're going to talk about, when you're interested in it, or you're portraying that in your tone, it really helps to you in connecting. So finding a mentor or mimic other inspirational figures. You can find a lot of inspirational figures obviously online who are like some of the best. Like do a Google search on best TED Talk professionals, or best TED Talks, and like getting some of, and look at what they do. What kinds of things among this are they doing or not doing, right? Even best presenters, what makes the best presenter, and just finding some examples that can be really helpful as well. And obviously your body language, facial expressions, and your eye contact, whether it's with the people or the camera on your Zoom right now, unfortunately, in our society. Using visual aids so that it's not just you chatting, talking. The visual aids are so, I forget the percentage, but there's like a huge percentage of what people take in is like the visual, and then there's the audio, the what you hear, and they're both important, but that seeing
that's part of the reasoning behind the Google CEO's use
Yep.
of using only visual
exactly
slides, because the words and the visuals go well together. While you have only text, or even limited text, the mind is then going to get distracted.
Right. Yeah. So and then supporting your audience, like making sure that you are like in touch with how they're getting, what are they receiving or not receiving. And Chester, you were speaking about teaching English, and that's a big one. You can tell if they're not getting the concept, right? If they're just not it's there's something you got to back up, and you maybe got to redo it again, and maybe in a different way, and use a different approach to get through sometimes, right? So, and then
all the time.
Yes, all the time. Exactly. Using your voice. And I think part of that, what I interpret that as being, is obviously, using your voice in your tone, being, cognizant of, all of that with the actual voice, but also using your voice versus somebody else's. Make it personalized, make it your approach. Use what works best for you, not what everyone else is doing necessarily. What the style that works for you and that you can actually shine in the most is what you want to do, obviously. And lastly, relax and enjoy yourself. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but yeah, trying to relax and and take some of the pressure off yourself as well, and can make it more enjoyable. Now, on the right side, I do have some of the nonverbal aspects, talking about confidence, right? And how you look when you're confident, right? Are you like slumped over and, talking very softly where you can't, that might portray a different kind of person than you want to be. And so, are you confidently talking like you have been when you've been talking with me? And, that's a more, that's going to exude confidence, right? Your open body language, not sitting with your hands all crossed or your arms crossed, or very, and this is really important when you're in person, because there's a bigger picture, right? There's all of you, not just your face, generally. So, trying to open your body language up as well. Smiling, while you're, I used to put on right by my camera, because when I started doing online, camera things, this is way before COVID, when I was doing online workshops, I would find myself looking at like the person, like I'm looking at you right now and giving you that eye contact, or so I think, but I'm not. If I look here, I'm giving you the eye contact. Exactly. So it's hard because you're sometimes I'm distracted sometimes by the person that's there, and I want to give them good eye contact. And I must say, I'd much rather look at somebody's actual, head and them, live, than looking at the camera. But I used to put smile and like, look here, so that I would try to remember to, give more of that presence there. So.
But it is really hard to look directly at the camera, because.
Oh, yeah. I mean, talk about non-personal.
I'm attending through my through my iPad, and my iPad has you in the corner, and then if I'm looking at you, then I'm not looking.
Yep. You're speaking to the choir. I preach to the choir. That's exactly my situation too. And everyone, when they're doing, Zoom and such, you have the little panel on the side, right? And then there's a presentation that's being shared. And then there's the camera that's up there that you're supposed to look at if you want to have good eye contact with them, but it's really hard to do. So, what's that?
No,
I
I was just
okay.
I was just agreeing with you by making
Yeah.
a
I also
noise.
say like exuding warmth, right? Like, and how do you exude warmth? How might you exude warmth?
Of course, through the voice.
Yeah,
When-
through your voice, that friendly, portraying friendliness and connection and here to help and support, warmth, not the, okay, tonight we're going to do this and we're going to, you know what I mean? Like you're talking more, you just
It's just a
genuinely.
talking way that you would talk to an actual person.
Yep. Yeah.
I know it sounds really obvious, but
It does, but I'll tell you,
but
it's
it's something that I think a lot of people understandably forget.
yep,
If you
absolutely.
don't have practice.
And then the
presenting
last one, I talk about the superhero pose. And I use this. I don't know if you've ever heard of this in the concept of, I generally talk about it when talking about preparing for an interview, for example, a job interview, right? You want to be confident and have that open body language, exude warmth, smile, all of that, right? You want to do that, but it's really hard because you're nervous. You get there and you're just, all wound up and you're super nervous, understandably, right? It's a big deal. But I talk about doing a superhero pose. And what I mean by that is standing up, spreading your legs, your hands on your hips, chest out, and standing tall. And that's that like Superman or Superwoman pose, right? Now, obviously, you're not going to do this when you check in and you're in front of, the like in the waiting room, but go into the bathroom and do that quick. And then you take like 3 really deep breaths in and out. And it has been shown through research that increases your confidence level and your ability to approach it better. So trying to do that, I talk about that a lot, but the same would be true before a big presentation at your work or at your whatever volunteer organization, wherever you're doing this presentation, right? It would help in any way. So any questions that you have so far?
No, but this all makes sense.
Okay.
And it's interesting to hear you give your take on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think these are principles that we can all, grow from. And, I'm a big believer and there's no like perfection, right? We're all striving to do the best that we can do. And, I certainly make some of these, errors when we're talking, at different times. And you know what, we're all human and that happens, right? But if we know about what they are and how we can enlist them, we can do a better job of hopefully, improving at them and doing even better than we can. So then we have. So the other tips for presenting, I like this graphic as well. I'm a big graphics person because I think it kind of helps to just show things more than just the list of each of the items, right? I could have listed each of these items, but showing a graphic that speaks to the audience and to me is more helpful, I think. So we've already talked about practice makes perfect, but how do you practice, right? So how do you gain practice if you have a big presentation or you're wanting to increase your presentation skills? What are some ways that you could get practice on your own that you can think of?
Practice in front of a mirror.
Absolutely. That's practicing on your own. Absolutely. And doing that and taping it so that you can actually watch it. And a lot of times you realize things you had no idea how often you said the word or whatever, and then you're cognizant of it so you can reduce that. That's a great tactic. And practicing on your own, practicing with family and friends can work too. But there's also a lot of I don't know if you're aware of or familiar with Toastmasters at all. It's kind of the international public speaking.
Yes, I've been part of an online Toastmasters club.
Oh, great. Like recently?
Yeah.
And how has that been virtually? I've been curious.
It's worked. It's just a matter of course, getting people to remain engaged.
Right. but they do, it seems like they give, from what I've heard from other people who participate in the past, I actually have not participated myself, but Toastmasters is one of the really recognized ones because they have a whole system for it, and you work on this perfecting or improving it and delivering it, and really, just it's a supposedly effective program. So I'm glad to hear you've done it as well. That's just another way for you to feel more comfortable, right? In making presentations, in practicing, in all of that. So in a supportive environment, right? Everyone's there to learn.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just speaking, but also developing your own content, because there are different speeches that members give at different points in their membership.
In their development and such,
Yes, there's a full curriculum for all members, and then of course the more they follow the curriculum, the more that they'll improve.
Right. That's great. No, that's awesome. So a couple other things that excuse me, are important. We've already talked about eye contact, right? Whether it's in person or there, really. And one of the tips that I give people when I'm talking to them about interviewing, and they have maybe an interview panel or a presentation or whatever, if they're making a presentation to an interview panel, is to give the different panelists eye contact too, not just the one who asked the question, but make sure to give the other panelists, a brief, glance as well, to make them feel part of and drawn in. That's really important. And honestly, I think it makes it easier for you, because sometimes it's really hard when you're just doing an interview with one person or you're presenting to one person, you don't want to stare at them and never break the eye contact, right? Because that gets uncomfortable too, but you're not supposed to look down. You're not supposed to look up. Like, what do you do then? So when you have multiple people in it, you can obviously look to the other person, and the millisecond between the time that you leave the eye contact with this person and you get to the other person is a blissful break for you. So that can help. I think that's how I tell people to look at interviewing. Like panel interviews can be better than regular interviews for that reason, and because there's more people that might connect with you. Maybe one person doesn't, but there's others that do. So lots of reasons.
Since there's a school of thought that I think is reasonable to say that if someone just keeps staring at you in a one-on-one conversation, then they might be sociopathic.
Yeah, well.
Using the example of Elizabeth Holmes and how she defended herself in the media after the Theranos fraud story started to snowball.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, I'm thinking about how, of course, Obama is considered to be one of the greatest speakers.
Yeah.
And even when he's doing his interviews, he from time to time will look down.
Yep. He'll break it. I would say if you were in an interview, like job interview, I would try not to look down and aside, like a real, I would glance definitely for a moment or glance down for a second, but then come back up. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But no, that's great. And then using props, right? So whether it's a video or, your tech, your PowerPoint or, Google Slides or whatever, to make, your point and to make, to make it more interactive, right? And then finally, asking questions, right? Making sure to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions that they might have, whether it's through your presentation, which I often try to do as I'm going through, or certainly in the end to say, what questions do you have? That's going to help them to process it and take it in. So at that note, what questions, if any, do you have at this point about anything we've covered so far before we move on and talk a little bit about some of the technology?
What are your thoughts on the importance of hands? Since
Good question.
Yes, since of course I'm very much, when I'm presenting in person, I am a so-called hand talker, and of course,
so am I.
Yes, and of course during this time when we're mostly presenting on Zoom, if not only
right, you don't see it as much.
It's harder to see hands. So I have made a point of actually shrinking my range of motion by also ways to keep my hands close.
Yep. Well, first of all, I am very much like you. Yes, I'm very much.
People thought that when people can see your hands, then it creates that sort of implicit trust.
I agree. And with what you're showing and demonstrating that, your limited use of, you're not like having them all over all the time where it's distracting. There's that fine line sometimes of doing enough. And I think some of the cues, like you can't really see this one very well, but in my screen where I'm kind of doing exactly, or I'm making a point and I'm doing this, like I might go, that is exactly right. But it doesn't come through as well on like, Zoom, but that can be, I think, very good. And it can draw people in and all of that, but just watch be cognizant of the fact that too much body language can be distracting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've been teaching English as a foreign language, so I've viewed body language as a way to enhance what I'm saying.
Yep.
Especially
Exactly.
if I'm teaching words and I need to give some extra context.
Yeah.
So
No,
I'm
absolutely.
saying, for example, keep a broad view, then even if the person doesn't have the strongest language skills,
Right.
or if I'm not giving enough context verbally, they can at least see broad mean open, and then that's something that doesn't require any language skills to be able to understand.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. That's great. That is great. So let's chat really briefly about online versus in person. We have presentations. So they're different, but they're the same. And what I mean by that is, certainly they are different. You're talking to a screen versus talking to, an in-person live. And I think if I had my choice, I would definitely choose the in-person because I'm more of a connector and that's my personality type. I'm an ENFP. I'm all about like, that's very me. Now, some people might prefer, the online because they're a little less that way and more, introspective and maybe wanting to have, that it's a little, they like the limited aspect of it and it still can be very effective, right? But looking at, they're the same in terms of your eye contact, whether you're giving it to the device, right? That little camera, or you're giving it to the people live and spreading it out so that it, gets to your audience and, they all, see part of it, right? Your clarity of speech is especially important for online because it's harder than in person. In person, when you have the person right there, when they're accentuating and they're talking, you can that helps you in understanding. Whereas sometimes with technology as it is, maybe the volume's lower, maybe it's whatever. So it's harder in that way. So you've really got to clarify and I think, slow down a little bit more than you would in person. And I talked about smiling with your eyes, the tech being prepared, having a backup plan. So whether you are looking for, you are going to be doing like a presentation online or in person for a job or whatever, right? If it's online, right, you want to make sure if they want to do it on whatever platform, make sure you understand the technology, how it works, you're going to be okay with, and what about a backup plan? If for some unforeseen reason, given technology as it is, right, sometimes signals get, they die or whatever, what is the backup plan? Like to ask about that and say, I just want to make sure that I understand the backup plan if and when there are technology issues as sometimes can happen in, our virtual environment these days. And, to do that up front is really impressive. People are like, okay, they're really prepared, this is somebody that is coming to this very prepared. I love it. The tech tips, the Steve Jobs rule that I was saying to you, right? Or the rule of three. I'm sorry, not the 10, 20, 30 rule. Steve Jobs's rule of the three concepts of his are a compelling structure, right, to your presentation, keeping it simple, right? Simplify and keep your audience engaged. I mean, it's that in his mind is the foundation for success. When it comes to presentations, connecting, doing all of it, it's as simple as that. Like those are the big ones, right? To remember. And there's a lot of other parts that we've talked about already that fall underneath that, right? So great. So what questions do you have at this point? Any questions for me or?
No, I don't have any questions that come to mind immediately. No.
All right. Well, thank you, Chester. And you can always reach out to me as well.
Or actually because you mentioned mentors and and figures to admire? Who are the public figures or public speakers you draw inspiration from?
Well, gosh, I mean, there's so many, right? I mean, and several that have done like Cynic. Do you know oh my gosh.
Yes, Simon Sinek.
Yeah, Simon Sinek, thank you. I think he's really inspirational. And Brene Brown. I mean, there's several, but Simon Sinek, I love he talks a lot about like storytelling and putting the story first. And there's one that's, start with the why. He actually has one that's labeled that. And I'd advise you to listen to it. It's really good if you haven't.
I thought about that, and I've even written it down in a notebook. Start with the why, how, and then what.
Yep, exactly. Instead of the traditional what. Yep.
An example is with Apple. Why does Apple exist? To change the world. How do they exist?
Yes, I love his example.
Through technology. And then what did they do? They happen to make beautiful gadgets. The why Peace Corps. I want to serve the country. I want to help others. Okay. Right. How? By teaching. Or how I will. No, actually, teaching is more the what. So how? By engaging the community with an open mind.
Right.
Okay, what we do? Teach English or dig wells or whatever the job asks for.
Exactly. Now, it's a really powerful concept, and he has several other ones that are actually really good as well. If you it sounds like you're already in touch, but looking up, more of I love to listen to some of the TED Talks and people that I've never even known. There was one we featured. Her name is Jodi Glickman, and she's actually an RPCV, and she's going to be doing a webinar for us on, I think it's called Taking Ownership of Your Career. It's one that she's done. She does executive team building and career coaching, and she's very good. Her first one she did for us was it was one of our podcasts we featured her on, and she was talking about some of her her experience and such, and how she got into what she is doing. And it's a really interesting story that she has, right, going to Wall Street, and I mean just some really interesting things. But she did a great job, and you can see that one on our podcast if you go to if you go to Spotify and you just search for Jobs with Jodi. It's from, I forget how long ago, I think maybe within the last 10 or 12 episodes. I mean, we do them every week, so you'll see it, Jodi Glickman, and you'll see her picture shown there. But I find inspiration from a lot of different TED Talks and such, and there's some really great ones that are so powerful. Thanks so much. Make it a great day.